Okay, moving on to item 8, second reading, public hearing of ordinances. 8A, ordinance 23-42. Madam Clerk, please read the ordinance.
An ordinance amending the City of Port St. Lucie Code of Ordinances, Title 15, Chapter 159, Article 2, entitled Mobility Fees, providing for the adoption of the City of Port St. Lucie 2045 Mobility Plan as anticipated in the technical report, providing for authority, providing for general provisions, providing for definitions, providing for findings and declarations, providing for purpose, providing for requirements, for review and updates to the mobility plan, providing for conflicts, providing for severability, and providing an effective date.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. Mary Savage Dunham for the record, and I'm joined by Jonathan Paul of New Urban Concepts Online. We are here tonight for amendments to Chapter 159, Article 2 of the Code of Ordinances, which is titled Mobility Fees. The amendments proposed tonight are limited to the adoption of the 2045 Mobility Plan and some cleanup and clarifications to the ordinance. This is the finalized version of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 mobility plans. All of the comments from our fall 2022 special meeting have been incorporated into the document. In addition, Public Works has participated in the development and review of this plan and is in support of it. This amendment does not include any changes to the mobility fee, assessment areas, benefit districts, or the determination and issuance of credits. At our upcoming summer workshop, staff will be presenting a comprehensive project list with recommendations on priorities for discussion and direction from the council. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan Paul, who has a brief presentation for you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mary. And I'm not sure if the best way to do this if I share my screen or it's something that you all can pull up.
That's fine if you'd like to share your screen, whatever's easier for you.
All right. Let's see. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen here.
Was up there.
Jonathan,
Yeah, I just want to make sure it wasn't the email.
we can pull it up. Just tell us to go next.
If you want to do that, then sorry.
Okay.
Right. This is a presentation of the City of Port St. Lucie 2045 Mobility Plan. It's something that we've been working on almost for a 3-year period now, and this is sort of the culmination of that effort. Next slide, please.
It's not up.
All right.
Hold on. There you go.
Overall, this process, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mary.
Now it's up.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I just couldn't see the screen myself. It started in 2021 with a very high-level overview of intersections and corridors throughout the city and identify which projects should be eligible for widening and which ones should be focused on multimodal improvements for sidewalks and bike lanes. And the Phase 1 plan also served as the basis for the mobility fee. Last year, there was a Phase 2 plan that updated the projects and further. Got into much greater detail in terms of overall multimodal improvements, as well as roadway improvements. And then that plan was used to update the mobility fee as part of the mediated settlement between the city and the county. And then this is the final culmination, which is known as the 2045 mobility plan. Next slide. The updates include project timelines into 5-year windows. And the intent is those projects would be further defined as the city goes through its annual capital improvements program. And that's something that your staff will be working on this summer. There's a request that all county roadways be removed from the mobility plan, and those have been removed from the projects. The mobility plan reflects prior direction from the council last October, and it is a joint effort with the planning department and the public works staff. Next slide, please. So there are three primary documents. You'll probably see a lot of information that's out there. The one document related to the mobility fee itself is titled the Phase 2 Mobility Plan and Mobility Fee. And that details the calculation of your currently adopted mobility fee. Nothing is changing to that fee, as Mary talked about earlier. So anybody that wants detail on the fee, that is the appropriate document. The mobility plan itself is entitled the 2045 Plan, and that's basically self-explanatory. And then we also prepared a summary of the two, which combines both the plan and fee at a very high level overview. Next slide. So the plan itself has a lot of detail related to both corridors, intersection, and transit improvements throughout the city. Next slide. This is one of the main maps, the main plans that really identifies which roadways are intended to have new road capacity or the widening of a roadway from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, or the addition of a center turn lane, and then which roadways are slated to only have multimodal improvements.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
can we just pause there real quick, Jonathan? I just want to hit on this point because we had a recent discussion with roadway networks on this board. And when I met with one of the consultants, specifically on the west side, they continue to tell me that, oh, this is going to go perfect with the mobility plan because we're going to be using golf carts instead of cars and, you know, all this stuff. And so what I basically said was that this mobility plan was never intended to not build roads ever again. And so I just want to make sure that you as our consultant is confirming that on record, specifically when I'm looking at the western side of the city.
Absolutely. We have not removed any of the roadways in the western portion of the city. The grid is extremely important to provide out in that portion of the community. So the mobility plan itself and the mobility fee technical report, every single road that's been planned out there is shown, and they are shown initially as 2-lane roadways. And then if warranted due to developer traffic or direction from the city council, they would be widened to 4 lanes. But we have not removed any of those roadways to the west. They are an important part of the transportation system. The multi-use pathways or bike lanes can accommodate golf cart travel, can accommodate scooters and bicycles, but all those roadways are needed as part of that grid network, and all of them are shown on the map.
And on the opposite side, just to note for the record is, and this is why I fell in love with the mobility plan when we first started exploring this, is because on my side or my district side of the city, and as well as I believe Councilman Morgan's side, a lot of that has run out of capacity. There's no more additional lanes that can be created, and so therefore those are your mobility options. So this is what makes this plan great, because it's a hybrid. And I just want to make sure that we hit on that. Thank you, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So this plan just gets a little bit more into detail, and it shows where you're adding essentially a center turn lane, similar to what the city has done on Floresta Drive. The dark blue lines are where there's a proposal to 4-lane the roadways in the future. And then ultimately, if need be, there are also St. Lucie West and a portion of Village Parkway in the western portion of the city are slated to be looked at for 6-laning into the future. So the orange color are new complete streets. That shows the entire gridded network that has been in place for a number of years in terms of development, building that network as they move forward. In the future, there may be plans to 4-lane some of those roadways. The corridors that you see in green are all where there are needed multimodal improvements, sidewalks, bike lanes, multi-use paths. And all this is detailed in the mobility plan itself. Next slide. We also looked at establishing, in terms of getting around the community and identifying the major corridors, what should be the principal multimodal routes within the city. So that went into actually helping develop the overall prioritization. And as the city looks at multimodal improvements, the corridors shown in the light green of the aqua are really the main mobility corridors within the city. And then the secondary network, which is shown in dark blue, as you have an opportunity to expand it or as opportunities come along to build that roadways and build those multimodal facilities, they are definitely important. But the backbone of the system really is those major corridors like Port St. Lucie, like the Greenways, and portions of Floresta that the city is already improving. Next slide.
Jonathan, before we move on to the next slide, this is
Yes.
Stephanie Morgan. What is the principle? What are you're denoting there? Because you have the county roads as black and the principle is lime green, yet you have glades cut off in the lime green and just a small portion of it in the black for county.
We have, and that's something that we've kind of left in there for discussion purposes. In the longer term, the potential to have a coordinated trail with the county along Glades Cutoff, not any type of roadway improvement, but a multi-use trail along that corridor. That's something we will look at a little bit further. This map, we're intended to remove all the county roadways, so that may have been just one of the corridors that we have to go back and make a correction to. We did have in the mobility plan a plan for a multi-use pathway along Glades Cutoff, going from those two major sections. The county did ask that all the county roads were removed. I think we probably focused a little bit more on the specific projects and the roadway widenings. This is likely one map that we need to go back and make one final edit to. And this is just a little bit more into detail of the overall mobility plan for the multimodal facilities. The prior map just labeled them in terms of priority. This actually gets into definition of where we're looking at a shared use path, a multi-use trail, a sidewalk, and a multi-use pathway. Again, this gets into a lot more detail on those overall corridors and the type of multimodal facilities that are proposed. And again, these are an ideal situation. Each corridor will go through a separate design phase. And as they go out there and they do right-of-way surveys and stormwater surveys, some of these facilities may have to change due to some level of right-of-way constraint. But in the ideal scenario, and the right-of-way as we know it today, these would be the ideal type of multimodal improvements on these corridors. And again, we'll look at the Glades Cutoff to make sure that that map is updated appropriately to not have a county facility on it. Next slide. We also looked at intersection improvements throughout the city, similar to the corridors. We identified ones that needed capacity improvements for cars, and then ones that needed safety improvements for multimodal accessibility. Next slide. And similar to the other maps, this is just a much more detailed version of it. Road capacity, shown in red, is where there's an actual need for additional turn lanes. Orange is where there's a need for curb ramps or updated sidewalks and other multimodal improvements. And then we also looked at roundabouts coordinated with Public Works at a number of intersections throughout the community. And then longer term, there are some, we still are leaving in the possibility for a partial interchange at the Marshall Parkway and I-95 interchange at some point in the future, and then also a revised interchange at Port St. Lucie Boulevard and the Turnpike, as well as some multimodal either overpasses or underpasses as they make improvements to the Turnpike in the future. Next slide. We also took a look at transit, and transit not necessarily in the traditional sense of a 40-passenger bus, but something a little bit more in line with either the tradition shuttle, another level of service or type of service that a number of communities are rolling out is actually neighborhood electric vehicles. Some of them people refer to them as souped up golf carts, but they essentially carry upwards to 7 or 9 passengers. And there are a number of private companies that are starting to run them within cities. And they're also looking to run them on multimodal pathways as well. So this could be either a combination of that type of vehicle, allowing some type of golf cart, or the autonomous transit shuttles. And then we also looked at the possibility of using the St. Lucie River and existing canals to connect some of the parks and destinations within the city and both sides of the city and both sides of the river via a water taxi. This is something that exists today in Fort Lauderdale, something that exists in the city of Tampa. We've integrated this and it's starting to actually happen within the city of St. Augustine as part of their mobility plan. I also looked at up in Walton County and Seaside and the Panhandle as part of their mobility plan, also initiating water taxi service. So this is something that would help, especially given Port St. Lucie Boulevard is not the most multimodal friendly corridor. And there's actually a great opportunity to use a water taxi service to provide multimodal access across the river to some of the destinations and the redevelopment planned as part of the city. Next slide, please. Go ahead and go into the next slide. And then we've also identified for, I believe, up to 15 corridors. We've identified cross sections that are shown both as a phase 1 and ultimately a phase 2 cross section. And these are primarily the major corridors within the city. So the phase 1 plan for St. Lucie West is to look at opportunities for access management and shared driveways. But ultimately, the traffic volumes out there will necessitate the need for this roadway to be 6 lanes in the future with some level of varying multimodal paths on each side of the corridor. Next slide. And this is just an aerial view of what the 6-lane facility could look like, and also a rendering of St. Lucie West in an idealized version. Next slide. East Torino, the mobility plan calls for a 2-phased approach. The first is to look at adding additional multimodal improvements to the corridor between Midway and Cashmere Boulevard, and should future volumes warrant it, look to ultimately 4-lane that corridor as well, if traffic dictates such. Next slide. Again, we have renderings and aerials of each one of these, and they are detailed in the mobility plan itself. Next slide. Cashmere Boulevard is one that we looked at from Pleasant Grove to Peacock as a potential to 4-lane in the future. We don't necessarily know if that's going to be warranted. So in the interim, I think a 2-lane divided would carry quite a ways and carry quite a bit of traffic. But ultimately, a 4-lane roadway could be warranted for that portion of the roadway. Next slide. Again, if you have any questions about any of them, I'm just going to go through them relatively quickly. These are just renditions. South of the Crosstown Parkway, we did talk with Public Works. Because there's a number of schools out there, initially we did not have this corridor identified as being 4-laned, but in looking at the traffic volumes and looking at the schools and the future need in the area, we are recommending and have included the 4-laning of CASHMERE from St. Lucie Boulevard to the Crosstown Parkway. Next slide, please. And this is just a rendition of what that would ultimately look like in the future. South Bend, we looked at a couple of different options. Phase 1 would be to add the multimodal improvements, and then ultimately in phase 2 to convert that roadway into a 4-lane divided facility. And where there's ample right-of-way, the facilities for multimodal should be separated. But as you see in the next 2 slides, where the right-of-way is more constrained, we have to have joint use facilities. So the next slide, Mary. Again, idealized version of what this facility could look like. And then a portion of where the right-of-way becomes more constrained, you may have to combine those type of facilities as you go into further design. We also looked at Bayshore Boulevard. This is one that's gone back and forth a lot. It doesn't have the volumes to necessarily trigger a 4-lane in the future. It also has a fairly compact right-of-way. So we did coordinate with Public Works to have a 2-lane facility with 6-foot sidewalks on both sides, and also wider paved shoulders that could serve both bicycle traffic and also offloading and unloading of delivery vehicles. And then where room does allow and where there aren't a lot of driveway conflicts, either providing a raised median or providing some type of pedestrian refuge as part of either roundabout improvements or along the main line of the corridor. Next slide, please. And this is just a view of what that could be. And we've also included a detailed analysis of level of service, both for vehicles as part of the mobility plan and also for all multimodal facilities within the city. Next slide. And so this will really help to serve, the primary purpose of this is to give a snapshot in time of what the city's services are today, what facilities exist today. And then this will allow the city over time to actually evaluate and calculate how many miles of sidewalk they added, how many miles of bike lanes, and where they've actually made improvements in the overall quality of the environment for people walking and bicycling. Next slide. And the city itself has various policies related to speed limits. We have established at least a process that the city could consider additional lower speeds on residential streets if there are actually improvements that are made to those corridors that narrow those roadways to actually get the drivers to drive slower speeds. Now, this is something that would really be a follow-on effort through the Public Works Department, but the mobility plan sort of laid the groundwork for retrofitting some of your existing local roads to make those also more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. Next slide. Again, this is just sort of a snapshot in time of where you all are at today as a community. Next slide. So really, ultimately, this is an important step in terms of officially adopting the mobility plan. This mobility plan will serve as a source of information and projects for you to update your capital improvements program. Eventually, there may need to be some amendments to the comprehensive plan related to concurrency and implementing the mobility fee. Obviously, there's some continued discussion about the network west of I-95. We are recommending that the city at least consider a traffic count program on your major roads. Many of the traffic counts that were available were on state roads and county roads, not a whole lot on city facilities. And so an ongoing program would allow you to evaluate improvements over time. We've also laid the groundwork for a neighborhood traffic calming program. And I know you've all had a lot of discussion about micromobility and microtransit. And that's another project that would be a follow-on in the future. Next slide, please. And I believe that concludes the presentation. I'm here to answer any questions that you all may have. I know it's concluding a long process, and hopefully it's a reflection of what you as a council have directed us to prepare to improve mobility within the city.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you again for all of your hard work. I mean, this mobility plan is so very important to our city for the future, 2045 and beyond, because we all know how long it takes to get roads done and how much these projects cost over time. But council, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Paul? Anyone? No? Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul, and thank you for the team as well. Our staff has done an amazing job working collectively with our consultants to make an amazing plan. There's so much this is going to be utilized for. It's definitely not going to be one that sits on the shelf, I can tell you that. I'm looking forward to seeing future CIPs and how it's going to align. I also know that when we have future TPO discussions and we adopt 2045 plans, I'm going to be looking to staff in this particular plan as far as do we need to update our positioning on certain items, because there's a long list on TPO, and sometimes I look at certain projects on that list and wonder if that particular project needs to be moved up, and if we could talk to the TPO board about that with this plan. And I think with the data that we have now, I think it might give us a good position to be able to have that discussion. So I welcome that. I really like the moving towards target zero safer streets for all grading system. And I really would like to eventually hone into that a little bit, more importantly for our strategic planning session. So when we think about how we do our surveys, we always get hit really hard with mobility and the ability for people to feel like they have good mobility in the city. And so looking at the grading system, it really is going to provide us as a council guidance on what areas can we focus on in our strategic plan for that year. And more importantly, Heath, I would love to see us even potentially, as we look at projects and how we're going to prioritize them, to have a similar grading system with it, that staff can even look at and develop to help advise council. I like the fact that we know, okay, landscaping on a 5-foot sidewalk, most of them in the city is at a D right now. That might be low-hanging fruit that we can look at for projects to be able to address and improve mobility throughout the city to address our strategic plan goals. So very good job, Jonathan, Garrett, very good job, team. I look forward to our future discussions with this and it being a document that we carry with pretty much everything we do, from the budget to the CIP to everything else. So thanks.
Any other comments? No? Yes, go ahead.
Several years ago, when I come on council, we were strapped with what we could actually do with our money as far as building roads and so on and so forth. This mobility fee gives us the latitude to do what we need for our city. And it's very exciting for me to sit here and see where we were at when I come on council, to look at this finalized plan. And I see a lot of heated debates coming forward about where things are going to be jockeyed on the list, because I've seen a lot of what Jonathan was recommending happen to be in my district. So I see a lot of debates coming forward. So I'm very happy that we finally come to a finalization. I say finalization, but I know it's not finalized. But having something forward where we can say, okay, this project needs to get done, this project needs to get done, and prioritize them that way to meet the ever-changing needs of mobility in our city. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I'm really interested in learning more about the traffic count program, and then going back to amendments to our comp plan. We've had a discussion about how we can have teeth to make sure our network gets put in place. And so I'm very interested in our initiated amendments to our own comp plan to make sure that we can address these issues in the future, because, this is 2045, it's a long plan, but, there's going to come a point where we're not here, and future councils are going to need to know what the intent of the previous councils were. And so to have it baked into our policies and have that be our real guiding force through our comp plan is very, very important. So I'd like to see us move that needle as much as we possibly can, especially since we know what we're facing, particularly out west in the next several years. But for anywhere else where we need to address it in our comp plan as well, it's super important. Mr. Stockton, what do you have for us?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't get up and say a little something. We hit on a lot of words that mean a lot to me: CIP, prioritization. So we got a lot of things going on. So fortunately, we are in the process of developing a presentation that will be provided to you at the summer workshop, that will allow plenty of debate and plenty of discussion about how we're going to rank these projects. It's been a very challenging task to put this presentation together because it's so many moving parts. It's, do we do the small projects? Do we do one big project? Do we sprinkle it around? How do you do it? So there's so many moving parts. It's really difficult to do. So I think we're going to have a really lively, engaged conversation at the workshop trying to figure that out together. That's one thing. That will then, once we determine that, drive our CIP for the next, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Realistically, some of these projects are going to be multi-million dollars. So we look forward to doing that, and that will actually help us greatly. Kind of historically, staff's been the one out there building our CIP. Is this really what council wants? Is it kind of what we think we want? This is really going to help us with this prioritization list determine, the consensus of council, what's going to be the best benefit for the city, and, not what, just staff believes. So I'm really looking forward to that. The last thing I'll add, Mayor, you touched on a citywide traffic count program, and we have explored many different avenues with that. We actually had a conversation today, coincidentally, so I had to get up and mention it about that. We're looking at some various services, and so we had originally gone down the path thinking, well, let's build our own database, we'll do our own staffing and kind of move around and do it that way. However, that's still very laborious and still staff intensive. We've looked at some programs now that really pull in the data. Data's already there, we just got to harness it. So a lot of these things use cell phone data, Bluetooth data, and they're tracking you anyway, and they sell the data, and so we can get that for relatively cheap and know, in real time almost what the volumes are on our roadways. That's how Google does it. You look at the map, it's red, there's stop, they know what speed you're going. We can harness that same data and have realistic snapshots in time of any time we want. We did a roadway project here. Well, let's look at what it looked like a year ago. What were those speeds? What were the volumes? Here's the project. Now let's look forward. What's it look like now? So that'll be a very valuable tool that should be coming forward soon. I'm surprised we've not got there yet, but we're just having some hurdles figuring out exactly what we want. But that's that.
Why that is so important too is because, if you think about it, we rely on all these traffic studies and they're all subjective and there's really nothing in real time. Well, this is an opportunity to really learn what's happening in real time on our roads at any given time where that data can be harnessed. And it's part of our strategic plan, smart and connected city, using innovation and data to make our decisions for us. So, or help us make those decisions for us. So it's time to get there for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Madam Mayor.
yes.
So maybe think of the Public Works facility, the new building. Obviously, I don't have to impress this, but you probably already thought about this. This is the time that when we do build out that building in particular, is that we're looking at the technology space that we're utilizing. Because we use the Thornhill homes now, and obviously those are way outgrown and need and they need to go into the facility. So when that happens, I think back to, I think it's Mount Pleasant, Maryland, that I met with their IBM team that did all this data and data-driven information and almost had like this hub. So I'm really interested in seeing what you guys are going to do with that and how we can maybe update our space when we get to that point. And I'm always game for technology. So to me, it's cost effective, it saves money, and it helps us with support in regards to the areas where we don't have enough staff to cover. So please bring that forward whenever you have that. And then to the comp plan discussion, Madam Mayor, you're absolutely right. I don't believe that this document should stop here. So my question is, Mr. City Manager and Mr. City Attorney, what are the next steps in regards to updating our comp plan to ensure that we're memorializing this the way we should be over time?
Well, I think as our previous meeting we had about a week or two ago, we've already had conversation with Mary and Teresa to start beginning that process and also get legal involved so we can begin that process.
Excellent. And do we have a timeline yet on when we can anticipate either meetings with council or an item to come forward? Timeline?
I apologize. Mary and I were consulting. What was that question again?
The comp plan update for the mobility to reflect, so we have a consistent document throughout. Do we have a timeline on when we can anticipate council to receive that change?
Well, I think as City Manager Morejo stated, we're looking at bringing something forward soon to you for a particular issue for the Southwest annexation area. And then also, I'm hearing from the council today, it seems like there's consensus on looking at how we can move forward some of the mobility comp plan amendments. I know Mary has been working on an RFQ for a comp plan amendment to do a complete overhaul, which is overdue.
Right.
So it's something that we need to kind of collaborate on as to whether we want to take these pieces first or do a holistic approach, which will delay, because there's some outreach that needs to be done, some analysis, et cetera. So just something to think about.
Because typically, comp plan's every 5 years, the whole comp plan for review and for amendments, correct?
Absolutely. And the last year that we did was probably, I think, 2019 or 2018, that we're required to do from the Department of Economic Opportunity. So we're due for that. What at that time, all that we were able to do was just do the basic Florida statutes requirement. So we didn't do a complete look at the city's comp plan as a whole. So it's definitely overdue. I think it's timely to do that as to whether what comes first.
So I don't know how everyone else feels, but when it comes to our mobility issues and our internal roadway network, I would say we need to get that done and in stone prioritized first, if the council agrees, and then I'll then move forward with the overall.
That's what I'm hearing, and I hear consensus on that. So certainly we'll take that.
Madam Mayor, what we can do is put together a schedule identifying both options and provide it via memo to the council.
That would be excellent, Mr. City Manager.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. And I think, Madam Mayor, and I think that it might have to come first just because it might be easier. We've already got the mobility plan done, so it hopefully isn't that hard to transfer into the comp plan. But, I don't want to also forget the other important issues like design and building elevations, all the things that we need to update in our comp plan. So to me, this is a priority item, more importantly, because as the city continues to grow and we continue to get more population, once they build, it's very difficult for us to fix what was not what we'd like to see. So we've got to try to get that vision out as fast as possible to ensure that we get what we want in the future. So thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Just wanted to touch on what the Vice Mayor mentioned about our TMC, or Traffic Management Center. We are going to have one in the new Public Works building. However, as we've heard in our hearing from council, we need to look bigger and longer, and how is the city going to look in 20 years? Well, in that avenue, we're working with the TPO, Fort Pierce, St. Lucie County, to try to bring this together and create a regional TMC, which is what the larger areas do. To Tampa and St. Pete and those areas, they have a TMC that manages multiple counties because it's more efficient if you can run traffic through multiple cities, multiple counties, rather than just worried about our city boundaries. And so that's the long-term goal, but that's probably 20 years out.
Right. But the one that we're planning now for us, are you going to be able to see the whole city?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything we have connected.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the council on this item? Seeing no one, will close the public hearing. Council?
Motion to approve ordinance 23-42.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any final discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Ordinance 8